Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here. I want to talk a little bit about U.S.-Canada because this is, of course, the most trusted, the closest relationship between the world's leading superpower and its neighbor to the north. Economies completely integrated. Canadians, a bunch of people, most of whom just live right above the American border, this little strip, because it's a lot more habitable there, a lot more hospitable. That's all the tourism and all the trade and the supply chains and sending kids to schools and all of these things, but not now. There is a rupture, as Prime Minister Mark Carney put it, not just in the international system, but also between the U.S. and Canada. What happens between the U.S. and Canada doesn't stay just between the U.S. and Canada. So many countries around the world find the Americans less predictable, less reliable, less trustworthy to do the things that they historically have said they were going to do. And that's particularly true and frankly, particularly painful for the Canadians. And Prime Minister Carney's done a lot of work to try to manage his relations, the relations with the United States, more effective than many leaders around the world. The bilateral meetings they've had have been pretty good, albeit relatively short, and certainly much more stable than what we saw between Trump and Trudeau back when Trump was calling Canada the 51st state, said they had to join. He gave up on that once Carney became prime minister, and temperatures had been lower for a while, but not now. President Trump now talking about 100% tariffs on the Canadians if they do a deal with the Chinese. Has rescinded his invitation to the Canadians to join the so-called Board of Peace, which originally was going to be the managing group for reconstruction in Gaza, now appears to be a broader effort to replace peacekeeping and collective security of the United Nations that most American allies have not joined, and the Chinese have not joined, but a few countries have. Anyway, Canada can't now because they were invited, and now it's been rescinded. Why is that? What happened? Because, Carney went to China, he met with Xi Jinping, and he said he was reducing tariffs on electric vehicles, and the Chinese in return said they were reducing tariffs on soybeans, and that'll be more trade between the two countries. And that's a relationship that had been pretty frozen for a while. You'll remember that Canada arrested the CFO of Huawei and had her extradited to the United States at the request of the United States. And in return, the Chinese detained two Michaels, these two citizens of Canada, and they were in jail for a couple of years. And that relationship was really frozen, you'd say, at the request of the United States. But if the U.S. is no longer trusted by Canada, and if that relationship is increasingly broken, and if USMCA, which was originally signed between Trump and the Mexicans and the Canadians, now can be undone or ignored because the United States unilaterally wants to change the terms, the Canadian view, unlike the Mexican view, which thinks that they have no choice but the United States, the Canadian view is, no, they want to hedge. They want to have better relations, deeper integration with other countries around the world. The Europeans, for example, on security and trade, but also on trade, the Chinese. And initially, President Trump said that makes sense, that's smart, I'd do the same thing if I were Mark Carney. But then he changed his mind. He didn't change his mind because the Canadians said anything new about their trade engagement with the Chinese. Rather, he changed his mind because Mark Carney went to Davos, gave a big speech that was the talk of the annual meeting. Literally everyone thought it was the speech that mattered. It defined the end of a U.S.-led global era, something that many of us have been talking about for well over a decade now, but no G7 leader, certainly on a global stage, was prepared to say it publicly, and Mark Carney did. And Trump really didn't like that, didn't like the speech, and didn't like the feeling of being shown up by the Canadian Prime Minister. Made him angry, made him petulant, made him lash out, and that's why we saw the announcement of 100% tariffs. I wouldn't worry about the 100% tariffs, first of all, because they're never going to be actually imposed. The Canadians export some 4.5 million barrels of oil every day to the United States. That would destroy the inflation numbers in the Midwest if they were to do that. You could certainly make an exemption for oil, even though that's not what Trump said with this threat. Oil, gas, autos, all of that is some 65% of Canadian exports to the U.S. total. So you're not going to hit those things. You've already tariffed a lot of the other big sectors that the Canadians provide exports to the U.S., like steel, aluminum, lumber. And then Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that actually that 100% only applies if there's a free trade agreement between the U.S. and Canada, which Mark Carney has said there isn't going to be. It wouldn't happen unless notice was given in advance to the other USMCA members, the U.S. and Mexico. So there's a lot of nothing there. But there is something there because the fact is that the United States now has a big rift with Canada. Trump is really angry with the leader of Canada. That's going to be a relatively challenging thing to manage because there's no question. U.S.-Canada relations are broken. It's permanent damage. We see it in the tourism numbers. We see it in the lack of trust. We saw it with Canadians booing the national anthem. The level of anger across the board for liberals and conservatives in Canada is extraordinarily high with the United States. It's stunning for Americans that have traveled to Canada before over the past decades. And I do worry that this is going to be something that we increasingly see with the Europeans as well. I saw Scott Bessent last week at Davos, and he said that the relations between the U.S. and Europe have never been so strong. I don't know if that's gaslighting or wishful thinking. It's certainly not true. And I think that, even though the Europeans are spending a lot more money on defense, that doesn't mean NATO is stronger. If there's less trust and there's less coordination, then overall the alliance is going to be weaker, even if the Europeans have more capabilities in defense. And that's, of course, a danger for Canada as well. The United States today is the world's most powerful country. That's not changing. But Xi Jinping is its most powerful leader, doesn't have the checks and balances domestically that President Trump does. Mark Carney put himself forward as the leader of the free world. But right now, the free world is a pretty nebulous concept. Not sure how much of a thing it is. What is the free world? Who's a part of it? How committed are they? Which institutions do they lead? And is the world heading in that direction? These are all extremely challenging questions to answer. And certainly the trajectory the world is taking right now is that the free world, what remains of it, is getting weaker and more fragmented, not stronger and more coordinated. Big challenge, and hopefully one that bunch of leaders are going to be able to more effectively answer than we've been seeing over the past months. That's it for me. Talk to you all soon.